The Chinese statue. The little Chinese statue was the next item to come under the auctioneer's hammer. Lot 103 caused those quiet murmurings that always precede the sale of a masterpiece. The auctioneer's assistant held up the delicate piece of ivory for the packed audience to admire, while the auctioneer glanced around the room to be sure he knew where the serious bidders were seated. I studied my catalogue and read the detailed description of the piece and what was known of its history. The statue had been purchased in Halishuan in 1871 and was referred to as what Sotheby's quaintly described as the property of a gentleman, usually meaning that some member of the aristocracy did not wish to admit that he was having to sell off one of the family heirlooms. I wondered if that was the case on this occasion and decided to do some research to discover what had caused the little Chinese statue to find its way into the auction rooms on that Thursday morning over 100 years later. Lot number 103, declared the auctioneer. What am I bid for this magnificent example of? Sir Alexander Heathcote, as well as being a gentleman, was an exact man. He was exactly 6 foot 3 and a quarter inches tall, rose at 7 o'clock every morning, joined his wife at breakfast to eat one boiled egg cooked precisely for 4 minutes, 2 pieces of toast with 1 spoonful of Cooper's marmalade, and drink 1 cup of China tea. He would then take a hackney carriage from his home in Cadogan Gardens at exactly 8:20 and arrive at the Foreign Office at promptly 8:59, returning home again on the stroke of 6 o'clock. Sir Alexander had been exact from an early age, as became the only son of a general. But unlike his father, he chose to serve his queen in the diplomatic service, another exacting calling. He progressed from a shared desk at the Foreign Office in Whitehall to third secretary in Calcutta, to second secretary in Vienna, to first secretary in Rome, to deputy ambassador in Washington, and finally to minister in Peking. He was delighted when Mr. Gladstone invited him to represent the government in China, as he had for some considerable time taken more than an immature interest in the art of the Ming dynasty. This crowning appointment in his distinguished career would afford him what until then he would have considered impossible, an opportunity to observe in their natural habitat some of the great statues, paintings, and drawings which he had previously been able to admire only in books. When Sir Alexander arrived in Peking, after a journey by sea and land that took his partly nearly 2 months, he presented his seal's patent to the Empress Zhu Si and a personal letter for her private reading from Queen Victoria. The Empress, dressed from head to toe in white and gold, received her new ambassador in the throne room of the Imperial Palace. She read the letter from the British monarch while Sir Alexander remained standing to attention. Her Imperial Highness revealed nothing of its contents to the new minister, only wishing him a successful term of office in his appointment. She then moved her lips slightly up at the corners, which Sir Alexander judged correctly to mean that the audience had come to an end. As he was conducted back through the great halls of the Imperial Palace by a mandarin in the long coat dress of black and gold, Sir Alexander walked as slowly as possible, taking in the magnificent collection of ivory and jade statues which were scattered casually around the building, much in the way Cellini and Michelangelo today lie stacked against each other in Florence. As his ministerial appointment was for only 3 years, Sir Alexander took no leave but preferred to use this time to put the embassy behind him and travel on horseback into the outlying districts to learn more about the country and its people. On these trips, he was always accompanied by a mandarin from the palace staff who acted as interpreter and guide. On one such journey, passing through the muddy streets of a small village with but a few houses called Halishuan, a distance of some 50 miles from Peking, Sir Alexander chanced upon an old craftsman's working place. Leaving his servants, the minister dismounted from his horse and entered the ramshackle wooden workshop to admire the delicate pieces of ivory and jade that crammed the shelves from floor to ceiling. Although modern, the pieces were superbly executed by an experienced craftsman, and the minister entered the little hut with the thought of acquiring a small memento of his journey. Once in the shop, he could hardly move in any direction for fear of knocking something over. The building had not been designed for a 6 foot 3¼ visitor. Sir Alexander stood still and enthralled, taking in the fine scented jasmine smell that hung in the air. An old craftsman bustled forward in a long blue coolie robe and flat black hat to greet him. A jet black plaited pigtail fell down his back. He bowed very low and then looked up at the giant from England. The minister returned the bow while the mandarin explained who Sir Alexander was and his desire to be allowed to look at the work of the craftsman. The old man was nodding his agreement even before the mandarin had come to the end of his request. For over an hour, the minister sighed and chuckled as he studied many of the pieces with admiration and finally returned to the old man to praise his skill. The craftsman bowed once again, and his shy smile revealed no teeth but only genuine pleasure at Sir Alexander's compliments. Pointing a finger to the back of the shop, he beckoned the two important visitors to follow him. They did so and entered a veritable Aladdin's cave with row upon row of beautiful miniature emperors and classical figures. The minister could have happily settled down in the orgy of ivory for at least a week. Sir Alexander and the craftsman chatted away to each other through the interpreter, and the minister's love and knowledge of the Ming dynasty was soon revealed. The little craftsman's face lit up with this discovery, and he turned to the mandarin and in a hushed voice made a request. The mandarin nodded his agreement and translated. I have, Your Excellency, a piece of Ming myself that you might care to see. A statue that has been in my family for over 7 generations. I should be honored, said the minister. It is I who would be honored, Your Excellency, said the little man, who thereupon scampered out of the back door, nearly falling over a stray dog and onto an old peasant house a few yards behind the workshop. The minister and the mandarin remained in the back room, for Sir Alexander knew the old man would never have considered inviting an honored guest into his humble house until they had known each other for many years, and only then after he had been invited to Sir Alexander's home first. A few minutes passed before the little blue figure came trotting back, pigtail bouncing up and down on his shoulders. He was now clinging on to something that, from the very way he held it close to his chest, had to be a treasure. The craftsman passed the piece over for the minister to study. Sir Alexander's mouth opened wide, and he could not hide his excitement. The little statue, no more than 6 inches in height, was of the Emperor Kung, and as fine an example of Ming as the minister had seen. Sir Alexander felt confident that the maker was the great Pen Q, who had been patronized by the emperor, so that the date must have been around the turn of the 15th century. The statue's only blemish was that the ivory base on which such pieces usually rest was missing, and a small stick protruded from the bottom of the imperial robes. But in the eyes of Sir Alexander, nothing could detract from its overall beauty. Although the craftsman's lips did not move, his eyes glowed with the pleasure his guest evinced as he studied the ivory emperor. "You think the statue is good?" asked the craftsman through the interpreter. "It's magnificent," the minister replied. "Quite magnificent. My own work is not worthy to stand by its side," added the craftsman humbly. "No, no," said the minister, though in truth the little craftsman knew the great man was only being kind, for Sir Alexander was holding the ivory statue in a way that already showed the same love as the old man had for the piece. The minister smiled down at the craftsman as he handed back the Emperor Kung, and then he uttered perhaps the only undiplomatic words he had ever spoken in 35 years of serving his queen and country. "How I wish the piece was mine." Sir Alexander regretted voicing his thoughts immediately he heard the Mandarins translate them, because he knew only too well the old Chinese tradition that if an honored guest requests something, the giver will grow in the eyes of his fellow men by parting with it. A sad look came over the face of the little old craftsman as he handed back the figurine to the minister. "No, no, I was only joking," said Sir Alexander, quickly trying to return the piece to its owner. "You would dishonor my humble home if you did not take the emperor, Your Excellency," the old man said anxiously, and the Mandarin gravely nodded his agreement. The minister remained silent for some time. "I have dishonored my own home, sir," he replied, and looked towards the Mandarin, who remained inscrutable. The little craftsman bowed. "I must fix a base on the statue," he said, "or you will not be able to put the piece on view." He went to a corner of the room and opened a wooden packing chest that must have housed 100 bases for his own statues. Rummaging around, he picked out a base decorated with small dark figures that the minister did not care for, but which nevertheless made a perfect fit. The old man assured Sir Alexander that although he did not know the base's history, the piece bore the mark of a good craftsman. The embarrassed minister took the gift and tried hopelessly to thank the little old man. The craftsman once again bowed low as Sir Alexander and the expressionless Mandarin left the little workshop. As the party travelled back to Peking, the Mandarin observed the terrible state the minister was in, and uncharacteristically spoke first. "Your Excellency is no doubt aware," he said, of the old Chinese custom that when a stranger has been generous, you must return the kindness within the calendar year. Sir Alexander smiled his thanks and thought carefully about the Mandarin's words. Once back in his official residence, he went immediately to the embassy's extensive library to see if he could discover a realistic value for the little masterpiece. After much diligent research, he came across a drawing of a mink statue that was almost an exact copy of the one now in his possession, and with the help of the Mandarin, he was able to assess its true worth, a figure that came to almost 3 years' emolument for a servant of the crown. The minister discussed the problem with Lady Heathcote, and she left her husband in no doubt as to the course of action he must take. The following week, the minister dispatched a letter by private messenger to his bankers, Coutts and Co., in the Strand, London, requesting that they send a large part of his savings to reach him in Peking as quickly as possible. When the funds arrived 9 weeks later, the minister again approached the Mandarin, who listened to his questions and gave him the details he had asked for 7 days later. The Mandarin had discovered that the little craftsman, Yung Li, came from the old and trusted family of Yung Shao, who had for some 500 years been craftsmen. Sir Alexander also learned that many of Yung Li's ancestors had examples of their work in the palaces of the Manchu princes. Yung Li himself was growing old and wished to retire to the hills above the village where his ancestors had always died. His son was ready to take over the workshop from him and continue the family tradition. The minister thanked the Mandarin for his diligence and had only one more request for him. The Mandarin listened sympathetically to the ambassador from England and returned to the palace to seek advice. A few days later, the Empress granted Sir Alexander's request. Almost a year to the day, the minister, accompanied by the Mandarin, set out again from Peking for the village of Halishuan. When Sir Alexander arrived, he immediately dismounted from his horse and entered the workshop that he remembered so well. The old man was seated at his bench, his flat hat slightly askew, a piece of uncarved ivory held lovingly between his fingers. He looked up from his work and shuffled towards the minister, not recognizing his guest immediately until he could almost touch the foreign giant. Then he bowed low. The minister spoke through the Mandarin. "I have returned, sir, within the calendar year to repay my debt." "There was no need, Your Excellency. My family is honored that the little statue lives in a great embassy and may one day be admired by the people of your own land." The minister could think of no words to form an adequate reply and simply requested that the old man should accompany him on a short journey. The craftsman agreed without question, and the three men set out on donkeys towards the north. They traveled for over 2 hours up a thin winding path into the hills behind the craftsman's workshop, and when they reached the village of Martian, they were met by another Mandarin who bowed low to the minister and requested Sir Alexander and the craftsman to continue their journey with him on foot. They walked in silence to the far side of the village and only stopped when they had reached a hollow in the hill from which there was a magnificent view of the valley all the way down to Halishuan. In the hollow stood a newly completed small white house of the most perfect proportions. Two stone lion dogs, tongues hanging over their lips, guarded the front entrance. The little old craftsman, who had not spoken since he had left his workshop, remained mystified by the purpose of the journey until the minister turned to him and offered a small, inadequate gift and my feeble attempt to repay you in kind. The craftsman fell to his knees and begged forgiveness of the mandarin, as he knew it was forbidden for an artisan to accept gifts from a foreigner. The mandarin raised the frightened blue figure from the ground, explaining to his countryman that the empress herself had sanctioned the minister's request. A smile of joy came over the face of the craftsman, and he slowly walked up to the doorway of the beautiful little house, unable to resist running his hands over the carved lion dogs. The three travelers then spent over an hour admiring the little house before returning in silent mutual happiness back to the workshop in Hali Shuan. The two men thus parted, honor satisfied, and Sir Alexander wrote to his embassy that night, content that his actions had met with the approval of the Mandarin as well as Lady Heathcote. The minister completed his tour of duty in Peking, and the Empress awarded him the Silver Star of China, and a grateful queen added the KCVO to his already long list of decorations. After a few weeks back, at the Foreign Office clearing the China desk, Sir Alexander retired to his native Yorkshire, the only English county whose inhabitants still hope to be born and die in the same place, not unlike the Chinese. Sir Alexander spent his final years in the home of his late father with his wife and the little Ming Emperor. The statue occupied the center of the mantelpiece in the drawing room for all to see and admire. Being an exact man, Sir Alexander wrote a long and detailed will in which he left precise instructions for the disposal of his estate, including what was to happen to the little statue after his death. He bequeathed the Emperor Kung to his first son, requesting that he do the same, in order that the statue might always pass to the first son or a daughter if the direct male line faltered. He also made a provision that the statue was never to be disposed of unless the family's honor was at stake. Sir Alexander Heathcote died at the stroke of midnight on his 70th year. His firstborn, Major James Heathcote, was serving his queen in the Boer War at the time he came into possession of the Ming Emperor. The major was a fighting man commissioned with the Duke of Wellington's regiment, and although he had little interest in culture, even he could see the family heirloom was no ordinary treasure, so he loaned the statue to the regimental mess at Halifax in order that the emperor could be displayed in the dining room for his brother officers to appreciate. When James Heathcote became colonel of the Dukes, the emperor stood proudly on the table alongside the trophies won at Waterloo and Sebastopol in the Crimea and Madrid. And there the Ming statue remained until the colonel's retirement to his father's house in Yorkshire, when the emperor returned once again to the drawing room mantelpiece. The colonel was not a man to disobey his late father, even in death, and he left clear instructions that the heirloom must always be passed on to the firstborn of the Heathcotes unless the family honor was in jeopardy. Colonel James Heathcote, MC, did not die a soldier's death. He simply fell asleep one night by the fire. the Yorkshire post on his lap. The colonel's firstborn, the Reverend Alexander Heathcote, was at the time presiding over a small flock in the parish of Much Hadham in Hertfordshire. After burying his father with military honors, he placed the little Ming emperor on the mantelpiece of the vicarage. Few members of the Mothers' Union appreciated the masterpiece, but one or two old ladies were heard to remark on its delicate carving. And it was not until the Reverend became the Right Reverend and the little statue found its way into the bishop's palace that the emperor attracted the admiration he deserved. Many of those who visited the palace and heard the story of how the bishop's grandfather had acquired the Ming statue were fascinated to learn of the disparity between the magnificent statue and its base. It always made a good after dinner story. God takes even his own ambassadors, but he did not do so before allowing Bishop Heathcote to complete a will, leaving the statue to his son, with his grandfather's exact instructions carefully repeated. The bishop's son, Captain James Heathcote, was a serving officer in his grandfather's regiment, so the Ming statue returned to the mess table in Halifax. During the emperor's absence, the regimental trophies had been augmented by those struck for Ypres, the Marne, and Verdun. The regiment was once again at war with Germany, and young Captain James Heathcote was killed on the beaches of Dunkirk and died intestate. Thereafter, English law, the known wishes of his great-grandfather and common sense prevailed, and the little emperor came into the possession of the captain's 2-year-old son. Alex Heathcote was, alas, not of the mettle of his doughty ancestors, and he grew up feeling no desire to serve any other than himself. When Captain James had been so tragically killed, Alexander's mother lavished everything on the boy that her meager income would allow. It didn't help, and it was not entirely young Alex's fault that he grew up to be, in the words of his grandmother, a selfish, spoiled little brat. When Alex left school, only a short time before he would have been expelled, he found he could never hold down a job for more than a few weeks. It always seemed necessary for him to spend a little more than he and finally his mother could cope with. The good lady, deciding she could take no more of his life, departed it to join all the other Heathcotes, not in Yorkshire but in heaven. In the swinging 60s, when casinos opened in Britain, young Alex was convinced that he had found the ideal way of earning a living without actually having to do any work. He developed a system for playing roulette with which it was impossible to lose. He did lose, so he refined the system and promptly lost more. He refined the system once again, which resulted in him having to borrow to cover his losses. Why not? If the worst came to the worst, he told himself, he could always dispose of the little Ming's emperor. The worst did come to the worst, as each one of Alex's newly refined systems took him progressively into greater debt until the casinos began to press him for payment. When finally, one Monday morning, Alex received an unsolicited call from two gentlemen who seemed determined to collect some £8,000 he owed their masters and hinted at bodily harm if the matter was not dealt with within 14 days, Alex caved in. After all, his great-great-grandfather's instructions had been exact. The Ming statue was to be sold if the family honor was ever at stake. Alex took the little emperor off the mantelpiece in his Cadogan Gardens flat and stared down at its delicate handiwork, at least having the grace to feel a little sad at the loss of the family heirloom. He then drove to Bond Street and delivered the masterpiece to Sotheby's, giving instructions that the emperor should be put up for auction. The head of the Oriental department, a pale, thin man, appeared at the front desk to discuss the masterpiece with Alex, looking not unlike the Ming statue he was holding so lovingly in his hands. It will take a few days to estimate the true value of the piece, he purred, but I feel confident on a cursory glance that the statue is as fine an example of pen-Q as we have ever had under the hammer. That's no problem, replied Alex, as long as you can let me know what it's worth within 14 days. Oh, certainly, replied the expert. I feel sure I could give you a floor price by Friday. Couldn't be better, said Alex. During that week, he contacted all his creditors, and without exception, they were prepared to wait and learn the appraisal of the expert. Alex duly returned to Bond Street on the Friday with a large smile on his face. He knew what his great-great-grandfather had paid for the piece and felt sure that the statue must be worth more than £10,000. A sum that would not only yield him enough to cover all his debts, but leave him a little over to try out his new refined system on the roulette table. As he climbed the steps of Sotheby's, Alex silently thanked his great-great-grandfather. He asked the girl on reception if he could speak to the head of the Oriental department. She picked up an internal phone, and the expert appeared a few moments later at the front desk with a somber look on his face. Alex's heart sank as he listened to his words. A nice little piece, your emperor, but unfortunately a fake, probably about 250 years old, but only a copy of the original, I am afraid. Copies were often made because... How much is it worth? Interrupted an anxious Alex. £700, £800 at the most. Enough to buy a gun and some bullets, thought Alex sardonically as he turned and started to walk away. I wonder, sir, continued the expert. Yes, sell the bloody thing, said Alex without bothering to look back. And what do you want me to do with the base? The base? Repeated Alex, turning round to face the Orientalist. Yes, the base. It's quite magnificent. 15th century, undoubtedly a work of genius. I can't imagine how. Lot number 103, announced the auctioneer. What am I bid for this magnificent example of? The expert turned out to be right in his assessment. At the auction at Sotheby's that Thursday morning, I obtained the little emperor for 720 guineas, and the base that was acquired by an American gentleman of not unknown parentage for 22,000 guineas.